Welcome to the S.O.U.N.D Project. I'm Gavin.
I'm Ryan, and today we're going to be walking everybody through what our process is when we get a new project.
There's so much that goes into a new project, and we just kind of there's so many details that sometimes people think that it's an easier process than it actually is.
Yeah.
We try to make it as seamless as possible and very easy for the client to get through, but just want to kind of set the expectation of what does a project look like for like a new recording studio design.
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways that like new projects will come into. So the most common is probably through our website. So if someone wants to start a project with us, they can go onto our website and there's a portal for them to fill out a form there, giving us some brief information. And we can take it from there. But then we also, sometimes people just email us and we take it from there.
That or direct message on Instagram or Facebook. I've gotten, lots of different ways people contact us. All of them's great. It's the main thing is just to get the conversation started.
Absolutely. And the way that we usually start that is usually I'm the one that'll take the first call just to figure out what the scope of the project is going to look like, to see mainly just what they're hoping to accomplish. And then from there, also making sure that we're a good fit for the client as well, because we always want to add value to all of our projects. So we're really able to determine that through that first call.
Yeah, we're kind of the first people to tell you whether or not we think that we're adding value to that project and the right fit. And if we're not, we like to guide you towards what is the right fit. So we know other ways to get you in place, but hopefully, and we're usually really flexible with this, like we figure out a way that we can work together.
Absolutely. And then once we have that initial call, then we create a proposal and we send that over to the client. And then once that initial proposal is signed, then we'll assign an acoustical consultant to it.
Yeah, and the thing about our proposals that's really important to know is that we usually like to work on just like a flat rate fee. I don't like surprises, and neither do clients. So at the end of a project, some projects take maybe more time than others. But what I don't want to do is sacrifice quality just because we're trying to hurry through something. And so I don't want surprises for a client to get to the end of the job and say, hey, this took 40 more hours than we thought. Here's a bill for that. Let's just get the project right. And obviously if the scope changes or we're adding rooms and things like that, we can relook at the proposal. But for the most part, just making sure we take care of business and make sure that the project is the best it possibly can be. And so that flat rate fee covers everything. It would be the design time, if there's travel involved, if we're going on site. That way there's just no surprises and you know what you're getting into.
Yep. And with that, then it also helps everyone that's involved in the project, because by working on the flat rate fee, then we're a resource for everyone that's involved. So
absolutely, we're obviously the client is our first intake, and that's the first person we're dealing with. But then at the same time, there's going to be architects and potentially structural engineers and interior designers, and there's just so many people that are going to be part of the project, and we're a resource for all of those. And what I don't like either, if some people will charge hourly to account for their time, but for me, building a studio is unlike almost anything that anyone's ever done in their life. Like as far as a client or a contractor, they may have never done this before. And what might seem like a minor question that could be skipped over if you feel like you're on the clock all the time. Like, I'm not going to bother Gavin with this because it's going to cost me this number of dollars per hour. We don't want that. Like, every question, even if it seems minor, could be major when it comes to acoustical details in a project. Yep. And so we're an open book for that. Like, just bring your questions and we'll get it done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And kind of with that being said, you kind of started listing off all the people that could be on the team. So then after the initial proposal is signed, then we start with a kickoff meeting. So do you want to talk about kind of what you talk about in those? Yeah,
so kickoff meetings are super important to everybody get on the same page. Obviously, we've had the discovery call already, and we have a good understanding of what the project is going to entail, but maybe not all the details yet. And especially if we're getting a lot of different trades involved, architect, interior designer, it could be an electrician, HVAC contractor. All these people could be part of that kickoff meeting, and we're talking through details that are going to impact what they do on the project, but also talking through the acoustical ramifications of that. It's like HVAC, for example. you can't handle HVAC the same way in a studio that you would in a office space. It's going to be too noisy and it's going to cause issues with sound leakage. It needs to be quiet. So we go through all those details. We talk about the goals that the client have, wishes, wants, needs, all those things are really important. And we get an understanding of what kind of furniture they might be using, what speakers are they planning to use, are they going to go with Dolby Atmos, or is it just going to be a stereo system? Like, all these things come out in that kickoff call, and it really just lays the groundwork for the rest of the projects. And a good kickoff call will always lead to a more successful project, as we also talk about things like isolation needs and how important that's going to be for them, just to really all get on the same page. It's really great.
Yeah. And so on the isolation needs portion of that, so we have a video on our YouTube channel that actually walks through the isolation simulator. So if anyone has questions on that, you can go through that in more detail. But around the same time as the kickoff meeting, we'll always have our clients go through the isolation simulator on our website. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that too?
Yeah, that's a tool that has been super beneficial for us, because with sound isolation, it's very subjective. What is okay for one client is absolutely unacceptable for the next. It's like, when we did the studio for Crowder, for instance, it's in the YouTube video that we have of him. He says, isolation just wasn't a concern for him. And he said, if I'm recording and I need quiet, my wife can go to Starbucks.
Yep.
It's like he's working around it in other ways. And so for some people, sound isolation is super critical, and for others, it's not even a concern.
Sure.
And so with this sound isolation simulator that we created, it allows us to get inside the head of our clients a little bit and say how much isolation is enough for them. And the simulator, what you do is you go onto the website, and there is a sample called No Partition. So it's supposed to simulate as if you're in the room with a live band. And you want to click on that sample. You also want to listen to these samples on some nice set of speakers or quality headphones, because a laptop demo just doesn't do it justice, because it's not producing the low frequencies as well as speakers would. But you click on the No Partition file, you turn up your speakers as loud as they'll safely go. Like, don't let the smoke out of them, but turn them up super loud, and try to simulate like you're in the room with a live band. And then you leave your volume set the same, and as you scroll down on that website, you'll be able to see different wall structures, different partitions. And next to each one of those is some information about it. It can be the thickness of the wall, the STC value, the sound transmission class value of that wall, and then also approximate price per square foot for the materials involved to construct it. It doesn't include labor costs, because that can fluctuate so widely, but material costs are pretty consistent there. And then next to that is a sound sample where you can click on that, and if you left your volume set the same, when you click from the No Partition over to this, you'll hear the relative difference of what it would seem like if you're standing outside the room that was built with those partitions. So it could be really helpful just for people to listen to that and say, it's all the walls are lettered, so it's like wall A, wall B, wall C, etc. And clients will come back and say, man, if I could get it to wall G, I think I'd be fine. And that doesn't mean that we're going to build the studio exactly like wall G, but what it does tell me is they've heard this sample, and I know the transmission loss values of how much decibels this is reducing at different frequencies, so I can design a wall system, ceiling system, floor system to match that. And so without that simulator, there'd be a lot of guessing, and also a lot of expectations not being met.
Sure.
Because people are expecting one thing and getting another.
It's definitely a great starting point, just because it really does help us figure out what is like that acceptable starting point and where do we need to adjust.
Yeah.
I know on like my initial discovery calls, I always mention, just for reference, that like an STC 33 is kind of what you can expect in like apartments, where pro studios are really going to start at that STC 60. So
Exactly.
It really just helps get that starting point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then once they go through that and we have the whatever level of STC or sound isolation is required, I guess, then we start on our construction details.
Yeah. So we have construction packages that we put together for our studios. If isolation is a big concern, that is addressed in the construction phase. And it's not something where it's not the most fun part of the project, but it's one of the most crucial, because if you don't get the construction details right, then you're not going to hit those expectations that they have for the sound isolation that they need. And so these construction details, sometimes for studios, it could be 30, 40 pages long, sometimes even more than that if it's multiple rooms. And it goes through details like electrical details, conduit runs, window and door specifications, section details for each wall, ceiling, floor type, and it could get really, really detailed. And we work with a lot of contractors who maybe have never built a studio before.
Sure.
And it's one of those things where you want to eliminate guesswork and kind of people calling audibles. If you give a really good detailed set of plans, then they know how it's supposed to be done. And they, if something's not clear, they can ask questions. And so these construction details usually happen early on in the process because that has to get nailed down first. And kind of in conjunction with the construction details, we're doing a layout of the facility.
Sure.
Like shaping the rooms and seeing how they interact with each other for sight lines and other things. But it's all like, okay, this is how it's going to be constructed, but it's before we do any sort of interior acoustical treatment.
Sure. And while that's being done, then on our side, then we're working on the renderings, which to see like on the outside between, like with Oscar working on those for the most part, it's really, really cool to see before or while the studio is being built, what it's going to look like in the end process.
Yeah, the renderings are a game changer for us. Being able to show people what the studio is going to look like even before it's built is very exciting for them and for us. It's the construction details, while I actually think it's exciting because I'm a complete dork about those things, when we get to the rendering side, that's when everybody gets on the same page and say, like, man, this is going to be an amazing space, and gives them kind of a keystone to shoot for. Like when the contractor sees these renderings, even though they may not be involved with the final details of the interior treatment, if they're only focusing on the general construction, it gets them excited too that this is important that I do all these details right, because at the end of the day, I want it to look like that. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so then at that point, the renderings would already be done. Construction would be completed then at this point. And so that's when kind of the acoustical treatment phase would come into play.
Yeah.
And so do you want to talk about that process a little bit too?
Absolutely. So the renderings, it's part aesthetics and part acoustical, because we have to, as a consultant, our job is to make great sounding spaces that are also inspiring and creative to be in. And so the renderings allow us to dial in the aesthetics, and that's a lot of times the client's really concerned about that part of it. But in the background, we're also making sure that it's got a good frequency response, and you don't have early reflection issues, and there's no weird resonances that are happening. Sure. And so the renderings come together, but then once we finalize the renderings and they say, the client gives a thumbs up, like that's what I want, then it will convert over into a 2D CAD plan that shows how that acoustical treatment is built and where different materials are located. And
Sure.
If anything's custom built from a contractor, we'll give those details, or if there's like off-the-shelf products from manufacturers, we'll show you the size, the quantity, and the location of all that. So again, there's no guesswork. It's just follow these plans and make that happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so along that process too, we always like to come on site to kind of determine, once construction is finished, determine what treatment is needed where, but we're also able to achieve that really well remotely if needed. So do you want to talk about how we're able to do that a little bit too?
Yeah, the testing is super important to our process, and at any time that we can do that, whether it be on-site or remote, we jump at the opportunity, because there's a lot of ways that we can predict performance with software and computer models.
Sure.
However, spaces aren't always built the exact same way or exactly to the plans, and having testing data inside the space just always ends up being a better result, because we're getting real world data of how the room is performing, and we're able to make adjustments to our plan to counterbalance some issues that we find in this test results. And so on-site is preferred, because we can be there, we can make adjustments in real time, do some experimentation with the testing by moving mix positions, speaker positions, running more tests, and like really dialing it in. And that process takes a good portion of a day on site, and just kind of an iterative process of going through all these different options. Now, we can still get some information remotely. We have a remote testing process where we can send a frequency sweep to the client, and they get an omnidirectional measurement microphone, and they can place it at the mix position and run tests per our specifications. Send that data back to us. They just record the frequency sweep through that microphone, through their speaker system, and we're able to post-process that and get frequency response, impulse responses, waterfall plots. And like I said, it's not as great as being there in person because, I mean, one thing with that is that the best measurement gear that I have is my ears. You know, like being able to actually hear the room in person is amazing. But the remote testing is something that is convenient. It's also a little more cost effective doing it that way because there's not travel costs of us coming into town to do that. And we still get data to work from.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to talk a little bit about the process then? Once we have that data, how you take the acoustical testing data and the modeling that we're able to do, how does that then get to a treatment phase on what kind of treatment and where does that treatment need to go? Sure.
Yeah. So this data that we have really informs us on how the room is performing. But if you just look at a frequency response, that doesn't tell you a whole lot except what is happening. It doesn't tell you why it's happening. And so the computer modeling side of things in conjunction with testing is where we really are able to dial in, okay, there is this peak at 50 hertz in the room. Why is that a peak? Like, is it what kind of room mode is it? How is it distributed in the room? And that will inform like where bass traps need to go and what type of bass traps and the quantity and size of them. And so the models are super important because we can line it up. And it's funny in these rooms where you can just very quickly tell like, oh, I know exactly what problem is causing this issue. And you know that you can be confident with your recommendations that it's going to solve that issue because you have testing data to back that up. So there's a lot of art and science to treating a room because there's certain metrics that you're trying to hit and things that you want to accomplish. But at the end of the day, too, like you have to factor in the the ambience of the room, like what the room's being used for. Like you could have a really acoustically accurate live room that's really dead and may not meet the needs of the client, and so that's where conversations with the client come into play. Like I like to find out if they have an existing studio, what they like and dislike about that space. And so we try to keep the things they like and then eliminate the things they dislike. And it's just a really important thing to know what they want, not what we want. Because what we want honestly doesn't matter. Like we want to deliver what's going to be the best performing space for them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's something too that it's so cool how much can vary, like client to client, basically, just depending on what they are after.
I remember one client I worked with that they did bluegrass music, and they had a live room that they were planning on building. And I got really excited about it when I heard bluegrass because there's all these acoustic instruments, and I was like, we can build this room and use all sorts of diffusion and make the room lively but controlled enough to really sing and kind of bring out the most of these instruments. And I started talking about that on the discovery call with them, and they said, no, like we really would want a very dead room, and we're going to add all the reverb digitally. And to me, I was like, oh no, it's like a missed opportunity. Like we could really make this room special. But it was special because it was what they needed.
Absolutely.
And so that was an example of, again, if it were my space, I would have done something different. But ultimately, that doesn't drive a project for us. It's like what do people need and how can we deliver that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So then the last step, once everything is installed, at this point, equipment and gear would be installed as well. Sometimes we come on site for final testing. And especially, I know we've been talking in previous episodes, like we have an upcoming Dolby Atmos episode, so we'll go a little bit more in depth on this. But especially with Dolby Atmos having very specific requirements that have to be met, do you want to talk a little bit about why that final testing is so important? Yeah,
the final testing, there's a lot of different reasons for doing it. One would be it gives us an opportunity to see how the room is performing and did we hit the mark? Like did we do what we wanted to? And if we didn't, it still gives us the opportunity to make some adjustments. Like there could be things that we could do to the treatment plan and try to tweak things to make it a little bit better. honestly, one of the biggest parts of the on-site testing is really dialing in that speaker positioning. We talked about that in our second episode.
Yep.
And it's something where getting that speaker positioning right and dialing in the listening position, I mean, that could be worth it for the trip alone, you know, because you could spend all day trying to position your speakers and maybe not get it quite right, where we can come in with our experience and really dial it in and make sure that you have a good plan going forward. But then also just taking a look at frequency responses, or if there's any problematic reflections. Like I remember one studio that we went into to do some testing, and on the impulse response, I kept seeing this big spike that was occurring around the time it would take for sound to bounce off the back wall and come back to the microphone.
Yeah.
But it was concerning to me because the back wall was treated really, really well, and that shouldn't be happening. And one thing that client had done was they put in a leather couch instead of a fabric couch like we had wanted.
Okay.
And this leather couch actually showed up in the final testing results as a huge reflection. And so that's something where they made the change and they switched out that couch into a fabric couch, and it goes away.
Sure.
And so things like that could be caught, or the positioning of where you have rack gear in your studio. Like if sometimes you see those really tall 6-7 foot racks that are directly to the right of your ear. For easy access, I get it, for logistics and everything like that, but that will show up on impulse response and testing results too. And also we can help in that final testing with positioning subwoofers. And so there's a lot of things and a lot of benefits of doing that. I would say that trip is probably the most rare that we do these days, only because the initial trip and then also the testing trip after construction is finished but before acoustical treatment goes in, that can sometimes be a little bit more important. But ideally, if we can do all three of them, you know, that would be the best results.
Absolutely. And just kind of like in hindsight on working on a lot of these projects and like seeing how they do come to fruition, it's really cool how no matter the size of the project, whether it's for a high profile client or if it's someone that it's been their lifelong dream to have their own studio, it's really cool how it's the same process for everyone. Sometimes they just have different goals.
Yeah, absolutely. I love every project we work on because they're all different and everyone has a little bit different needs and desires, and they're just different people too. Like most of my clients, I just consider them friends at the end of the project. You know, it's something where if I'm in town for a different project years down the road, I still get together with them, have dinner, or, you know, we're friends on Facebook and social media, and it's just cool to see how their business, if it ends up being like a for-profit studio or just projects that they're doing on their own, and being able to go and listen to what's happening. And then of course, like for the higher profile clients we get to work with, it's fun. I mean, almost every week I hear a song on the radio that was recorded in a studio that we did. You know, it's really fun to be a part of that, and you know, something that I don't take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that wraps up everything that we had for this episode. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the process for us is so important to get right, and that's why we kind of standardize. Like, it's a very consistent process every time we do a studio, because when you go out of order or you get ahead of put the cart in front of the horse, sometimes things get missed. And with studios, it's just such a precise science that we want to make sure that we're handling everything when it needs to be handled.
Absolutely.
And I think that that process, while we're always one of our core values is never settle, we're always refining it. We're making it better, because sometimes we'll have projects that say, like, man, we really need to put this as part of our process. But that's what makes it fun. We learn on every job, and we just try to get better every time.
Absolutely.
All right. So that's everything for this week. I really appreciate you guys being part of the S.O.U.N.D project. If you have any ideas for future episodes, feel free to email info@haversickdesigns.com, and look forward to future episodes with you next week. Take care.